Okay, welcome everyone to session number 289 of Kevin Reed's A Course in Miracles. All right, a vehicle for study. And once again, we are currently in the supplements to A Course in Miracles. And we are focusing right now on the Song of Prayer. Okay? So, today we will look at section 3 entitled Praying for Others. So let's just jump in before I distract myself. Praying for others. We said that prayer is always for yourself, and this is so. Why then should you pray for others at all? And if you should, how should you do it? Praying for others, if rightly understood, becomes a means for lifting your projections of guilt from your brother, enabling you to recognize it is not he who is hurting you. The poisonous thought that he is your enemy, your evil counterpart, your nemesis, must be relinquished before you can be saved from guilt. For this, the means is prayer of rising power and with ascending goals until it reaches even up to God. All right. So, we have to get rid of the poisonous thought that the other is the enemy, the nemesis. The other is causing me my pain, whatever it is. All right. So, he says, praying for others, in sentence 4, if rightly understood, becomes a means for lifting your projections of guilt from your brother and enabling you to recognize it is not he who is hurting you. So, in other words, prayer, because we're talking about the Song of Prayer and we're using that word, it's actually synonymous with forgiveness. Right? It becomes a means for lifting my projections of guilt. All right? And remember, guilt is what makes the world go round. Right? Guilt is the result of the belief that I am separate from the oneness. Call it what you want. God, spaciousness, all that is. It's a belief that I'm separated from it. Right. And that causes guilt because it was me that ruined the oneness. I left. I destroyed God. However your mind wants to think of it. I'm guilty of something. All right. I always think of the Bob Dylan song when he goes, "Look out, kid, it's something you did. God knows when, but you're doing it again." All right. Subterranean Homesick Blues, I believe it is. So praying for others, if rightly understood, becomes the means for lifting the guilt, the projections of guilt. All right, so when I'm truly willing to see correctly, all right, about the other or about whatever is going on, I'm in this section, I'm praying for them. What it comes down to, though, is that I'm willing to see them correctly. I'm willing to see the truth about them. That's why a prayer is for myself. Prayer is for yourself. Right? And this enables me to recognize that it is not the other who is hurting me. It is my thoughts. Right? It is my thoughts, my interpretations of what is going on. In these supplements, well, throughout the text, you could see the very deep psychological nature of this spirituality. Right? The poisonous thought, sentence 5, that he is your enemy, your evil counterpart, your nemesis, must be relinquished before you can be saved from guilt. Right? Just repeating the idea. And once again, that word that appears throughout the text, throughout the course, something must be relinquished. Right? So we're not talking about sacrifice here. We're not giving up something, which always entails some kind of resentment sooner or later. You're not giving up your anger, your fear, your hatred of the other. Right? You're looking at it with love all around you. You're sitting in the presence of love and looking at the situation or the person. Right? With the willingness to see correctly. Okay. That's relinquishment. It's not a sacrifice. I keep referring to my high school Latin class with Caesar's Gallic Wars. They would use that word relinquo quite often. When they would pick up and start a new camp, they would pick up, and leave. They would just take what they needed, take what they could carry, really. And everything else, they would just leave it, put it down, and walk away from it. They would relinquish it. Okay? I get redundant, I know, but the words, they're chosen for a specific reason. Relinquishment says, no, it's not a sacrifice. Okay? So my image, what my ego is guiding me to, the image of the other has to be relinquished if I'm going to find peace. Because it's poisonous. It's a poisonous thought, he says. And he says, for this, the means is prayer. Right? And you can see now how we can equate prayer with forgiveness. Right? For this, the means is prayer of rising power and with ascending goals until it reaches even up to heaven. Once again, very poetically reminding us it's a process. It's, as he says, it's the ladder, all right? Because our prayer has rising power. It gets better and better as we practice, as we desire to see correctly. All right. And thus it has ascending goals until it reaches even up to God, which is eventually the goal, is to remember God, to see the face of Christ, to see innocence, and remember God. All right. So that's the ascending goal. In paragraph 2, he says, the earlier forms of prayer at the bottom of the ladder will not be free from envy and malice. They call for vengeance, not for love. Nor do they come from one who understands that they are calls for death made out of fear by those who cherish guilt. They call upon a vengeful God, and it is he who seems to answer them. Hell cannot be asked for another, and then escaped by him who asks for it. Only those who are in hell can ask for hell. Those who have been forgiven and who accepted their forgiveness could never make a prayer like that. All right. So he says, so in the early forms of prayer, and what Dr. Wapnick did when he was talking about this, these supplements here and this section, he said he was reminded of the Psalms. There's quite a few of the Psalms, I think, were calling for the vengeance of, calling for vengeance on the enemies, calling for the destruction of an enemy, right? And it may look different, but it's the same. I'm praying to make the sale. I'm praying to get this job, get this new position, right? And there's competition all around, right? I'm, seemingly very subtly, praying for the failure of enemies, perceived enemies, competition, right? And we do that in our lives. So the whole idea is to notice, just notice what you're doing, okay? So that's the earlier forms of prayer, right? They will not be free from envy and malice, all right? There might be somebody who's annoying, who's frightening, There's a lot of people in the public view right now who are very frightening people, right? And I have, a friend, I have one, okay, who says that I can't believe nobody is, nobody's eliminated this person, and that's a thought of malice. That's thinking that I would be more peaceful if you weren't here. Okay? And he says that's really the bottom rung of the ladder to be praying like that. Okay? So they call for vengeance, not for love. All right? Where it would behoove us to be willing to see the truth about the person who's so scary, right? Not the ego scenario, right? But the actual looking past the ego presentation and then realizing the truth about the other. This would make our other decisions more palatable. Instead of ordering a hit on somebody. All right? There are plenty of Psalms about destroying enemies, and that's not what we want to do. All right? Because when we do that, we're reinforcing the idea of separation and separate interests. And my interests take precedent over yours. Is that the right word? I don't know. My needs are more important. All right. So they call for vengeance, not for love, nor do they come from one who understands that they are calls for death. In other words, they're reinforcements of the idea of separation. I'm looking for an answer within the ego thought system, within the world of form. All right? Therefore, I'm acknowledging and reinforcing the idea of separation. I separated from the oneness. I'm making that separation real. And there has to be a solution within the world of form. Right? So prayers like that are not coming from one who understands that they're calls for death made out of fear, right, by those who cherish guilt. Right? Those who cherish guilt, in other words, we keep reinforcing the idea of separation because guilt is the result of separation. Right? And they call upon a vengeful God. Just take those the examples of those psalms that call for the destruction of my enemy. Right? They're calling upon a vengeful God. Okay. And it seems as though this God answers them. All right? Think of all the plagues that were visited on the Pharaoh, things like that, and the swallowing of the Pharaoh's forces, right, in the Red Sea, was it? Right. So they call upon a vengeful God, and it is He who seems to answer them. So this is all happening within the ego thought system. And these are our early attempts at prayer. Okay? I'm not saying everyone calls for the destruction of somebody else, but there's subtler ways of looking for ego results. Okay? That's all we're talking about. We're just talking about looking for some kind of solution within the world of form. So he just tells us that you can't wish something bad on somebody. When I was reading this, I was reminded of some years ago. I was reading the autobiography of a yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. It was a wonderful book, just another stepping stone in my spiritual path. The autobiography of a yogi. And he was talking about how when he was younger, when he was a boy, he had a sister, and she was really annoying him for some reason, really making him angry. So he decided that he would use the power of his mind to, I think it was to raise a boil on her arm or something like that. And then he realized that he couldn't do that without inflicting it on himself. Okay? And that's just another way of what Jesus is saying here. Hell cannot be asked for another. Right? A boil can't be asked for the other person and then escaped by him who asked for it. So whatever kind of hell you're wishing for the other person, all right, you can't escape not the specific hell, but just hell itself, which is the world of form, right? Walking around uncertain, lonely, and in constant fear. All right? I'm just reminded of, I think it was Helen Schuckman's sister or sister-in-law, or Ken told the story that she just said, "Oh no, there has to be a specific hell for the people I don't like." So, but that kind of thinking keeps us in the thought of special interests and separation, and me or you. Everybody has to fend for themselves, and the world of form, which is, some of the existentialists would say, is rather hellish. Okay? Wasn't it someone who said hell is other people? But it doesn't have to be. If we go inside and ask, help me to see these hellish people differently. Okay? Practice, practice, practice. All right? Hell cannot be asked for another and then escaped by him who asks for it. Only those who are in hell can ask for hell. Those who have been forgiven and who accepted their forgiveness could never make a prayer like that. So he puts in that parenthetical expression there, and who have accepted their forgiveness, okay? Because everybody's been forgiven, right? And everybody is in the one mind. So one mind has already been forgiven. It's over. Right? We're living in the echoes, all right? We're living in the tail of the comet here. All right? But the catch is those who have accepted their own innocence. In other words, I no longer believe in my own guilt, so there's no need to project it. There's no need to project the guilt. Okay. Speaking of projecting guilt, I don't know if you can hear it, but my neighbor is having a guilt episode. He does that periodically. And I ask just to help me see him correctly. Right? I'm not trying to put pin medals on myself, because there's some days when I find it difficult to do that, but this is what Jesus is asking us to do for our own good. All right? Be willing to see the truth about the person. All right? So only those who are in hell can ask for hell. Right? Those who have been forgiven and who accepted their forgiveness could never make a prayer like that. Because if I realize I'm forgiven, there's no more guilt. There's no more guilt to be projected. I don't have to make prayers like that. All right. Paragraph 3. At these levels then, the learning goal must be to recognize that prayer will bring an answer only in the form in which the prayer was made. This is enough. From here, it will be an easy step to the next levels. The next ascent begins with this. What I have asked for my brother is not what I would have. Thus have I made of him my enemy. All right? So at these levels then, the learning goal must be to recognize that prayer will bring an answer only in the form in which it was made. All right? So if I'm praying for something in the ego mind, that's the answer I will receive. All right? And he says, and that's enough to recognize that. In other words, to see that, oh yes, all right? Am I praying from the idea of scarcity and separate interests? All right? Or am I sitting in the oneness, sitting with love surrounding me? From here, it will be a next step, just to notice, oh, that's what I'm doing. And sometimes I think that's what the whole course is about. It's just to notice without judgment, oh, this is what I'm doing, right? And this is the result, right? I feel whatever, lonely. I feel less than, right? There's something missing, whatever. As Jesus would say, I'm uncertain, lonely, and in constant fear. Okay. And that realization is a big deal. All right? Because he says the next ascent up the ladder begins with this. Right? What I've asked for is not what I want. What I've asked for you is not what I would have for myself. All right? I don't want that boil on my arm. I don't want you to slip on a banana peel or anything. Right? I don't want that. I don't want that for myself. All right? Then you have that realization, oh, so I've made of him an enemy. I think he's the one that's upsetting me. I think he's the reason I don't feel peaceful. All right? So then I recognize the investment that I have in making others guilty. All right? And you know, this rising up the level, it's realizing that when I'm praying with words, and don't stop, just notice. When I'm praying with words, I'm formulating what it is I think I need. All right? I'm building in limitations. Because words are limiting, okay? We want to reach that place, as Leon Russell would say, where there is no space and time, right? I used to always love that song. I love you in a place where there's no space and time. I love you for my life. You are a friend of mine. All right? I always thought that was a very cool concept. And that's what Jesus is telling us here. Just to notice. Oh, even in that prayer, I'm praying for my own peace of mind. I'm praying to see things correctly. Right? I'm stating that I don't see them correctly. But don't let it spin your head around. Just notice, oh, and you want to work your way up to praying without words. In other words, you're just communing with all that is. All right? But it's a process, right? Don't boot yourself in the butt. We get to the place where we don't ask for anything. We just commune, so to speak. All right. It is apparent in the next paragraph. Oh no, this is still paragraph 3, excuse me. I have too many notes. It is apparent that this step cannot be reached by anyone who sees no value or advantage to himself in setting others free. This may be long delayed because it may seem to be dangerous instead of merciful. To the guilty, there seems indeed to be a real advantage in having enemies. And this imagined gain must go if enemies are to be set free. All right? So, he's talking about the next step. The ascent up the ladder begins with, what I have asked for my brother is not what I would have. Thus I have made of him my enemy. It is apparent that this step cannot be reached by anyone who sees no advantage, nor value or advantage to himself in setting the others free. Right? If I can't see the advantage in seeing the truth about the other, then I'll keep on projecting guilt. And the whole course is trying to teach us that there is an advantage to that, all right? To setting the others free. In other words, releasing them from the idea of guilt, setting them free from the ego thought system of guilt. There is an advantage to that. And the advantage is remembering your own innocence. To put it succinctly, so he says this upper level of prayer, it can't be reached by someone who doesn't see the advantage in forgiveness. So he says this may be long delayed because it may seem to be dangerous instead of merciful. Well, if I see the innocence in this person, I'm vulnerable. They're going to get me. They're going to destroy me somehow. So to the guilty, to those of us who think we're separated, there seems to be a real advantage in having enemies. All right? And this imagined gain must go if enemies are to be set free. All right? So there's an imagined gain. All right? And on a deep psychological level, the gain is that I can use you to get rid of my guilt. That's what the ego counsels me. All right? If I could be free of guilt, I have to have enemies to do that. There has to be other people annoying me with different gradations of annoyance. Right? So the ego tells me I could be free of guilt if I have an enemy. All right? Without disclosing the fact that the guilt is in my mind. The guilt is a thought in my mind. It's a belief that I separated. And this whole world covers that up. So if I don't have enemies, oh my God, what's happening? Paragraph 4, guilt must be given up and not concealed. Right? Nor can this be done without some pain. Right? And a glimpse of the merciful nature of this step may for some time be followed by a deep retreat into fear. For fear's defenses are fearful in themselves. And when they are recognized, they bring their fear with them. Yet what advantage has an illusion of escape ever brought a prisoner? His real escape from guilt can lie only in the recognition that the guilt has gone. And how can this be recognized as long as he hides it in another and does not see it as his own? Fear of escape makes it difficult to welcome freedom, and to make a jailer of an enemy seems to be safety. How then can he be released without an insane fear for your? How then can he be released without an insane fear for yourself? You have made of him your salvation and your escape from guilt. Your investment in this escape is heavy, and your fear of letting go is strong. Right? So Jesus says, look, all these words, they may seem very logical, and you might, oh yes, that's the escape from the ego thought system. But then the application of it happens. As the Taoist teacher once said, everything theory until practice. All right? So this may sound wonderful in theory, but when we practice, I thought there could be a lot of psychological pain I start looking at my motives. I start looking at the things I'm clinging to. I start looking at my beliefs, and I'm asking for clarity. All right? And the ego tells me, don't look. It's too scary. All right? Don't look. Don't look in the closet. There's the monster. All right? It's very painful to look at what you truly believe. But that's only the ego telling you that. It's not. But we may experience it that way. All right? I mean, you have the... I mean, I get thoughts. It's like, oh, how could I have thought that? How could I have done that? How could I have, whatever. And having reached my age, there's a lot of memories, right? And I always tell Jean, my wonderful wife, that she'll ask me, what's the matter? Because I'll go, oh, so at some point, and she'll be in another room, and I'll just say, just a thought, all right? And that's the pain. That's that thought from the past coming up. It's like, oh, wow. It's really embarrassing at the least, shameful at the worst, But then, that's, as Dr. Wapnick would say, he told me one time, well, now that the thought is up, it's time to let it go. And we let it go by asking, help me to see this differently. And that's a form of prayer. All right? I'm willing to see myself correctly. I'm willing to understand why I did the things I did. All right? As B.B. King would say, I did what I did before love came to town. All right? So this process of looking is not going to destroy us, although it may bring up painful thoughts of shame and all kinds of things, right? But that's just the psychological process. And we're not to do it by ourselves. Realize that love is around you. Remember that love is all around you. It's your makeup. And we can use that symbol of Jesus. And you can use whatever loving symbol you prefer. Right? I know my niece always likes to think of my mother, her grandmother. Right? And to her, my mother was very loving for her. So when she's distressed, she has thoughts of my mother. Perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. Love is love. Take it in whatever symbol you prefer. The Course uses the symbol of Jesus and Holy Spirit. So when these things are coming up, when I'm being honest with myself, I'm projecting guilt onto this person, help me to see it correctly, letting go of the guilt, all right? Letting go of all my special thoughts, my special loves and special hates, all right? It could be painful, all right? And the ego will tell you, don't look, avoid the pain, don't look. All right. So this glimpse of the merciful nature of forgiveness may for some time be followed by a deep retreat into fear. All right. That's just part of the process. Doesn't have to be, but very, very frequently is. Because fear's defenses are fearful in themselves. And when they are recognized, they bring fear with them. All right. The Course always says defenses do what they would defend. All right. So if I need a defense, it's reinforcing the idea that I'm vulnerable. All right. Yet what advantage has an illusion of escape ever brought a prisoner? All right. So I think I have an ego solution here. And Jesus says, that's, being in form, it's an illusion. And he says, yet what advantage has an illusion of escape ever brought a prisoner? So if I'm desirous of some mishap, befalling you, that's only the illusion of escape from my situation. The real escape from guilt can lie only in the recognition that the guilt has gone. Right? The only real escape, right, from guilt can lie only in the recognition that the guilt is gone. There is no guilt. And how can this be recognized as long as he hides it in another and does not see it as his own? So if I keep on projecting guilt, I don't realize that it's, first of all, it's my guilt. There is no one out there. All right. And even that thought can be very frightening. I mean, really is frightening. All right. But it's a process. We just start to realize, oh, I'm projecting guilt onto that person. All right. I keep, now I don't do this, but just as an example, I keep making fun of people that are overweight. All right. And, people would look at me like, what are you laughing at that guy for? Look at yourself. But that's the guilt. I keep finding fault in the other. Right? I'm getting rid of the thought that there's something wrong with me. Oh, look at the way that person dresses. Some people are obvious about it, but it happens frequently. I mean, to all of us, really. So the real escape can lie only in the recognition that the guilt is gone. And the way we recognize that the guilt is gone is that process of forgiveness. I'm willing to see the truth. I'm willing to see the truth. And how can this be recognized as long as he hides it in another? How can I recognize that the guilt originates in my mind if I'm hiding it in somebody else? Right. Sentence 7. Fear of escape makes it difficult to welcome freedom. And to make a jailer of an enemy seems to be safety. How then can he be released without an insane fear? How then can he be released without an insane fear for yourself? You have made of him your salvation and your escape from guilt. Your investment in this escape is heavy, and your fear of letting it go is strong. All right? So fear of escape makes it difficult to welcome freedom. All right? And this gets very deep because we have a fear of remembering our own innocence. Because at that moment, I'm going to remember my relationship with God. And at that moment, I'm going to remember that my true existence is abstract. Right? And that causes all kinds of disruption, to say the least. Right? It's very strong fear. So there's the fear of letting go of this projection of guilt, this idea of separation is very strong. So I think I'm going to meet God. Ego tells him you're going to meet God and he's going to get you. He's going to destroy you. All right? It's the fear of escape. It makes it difficult to welcome freedom. We're afraid of our own innocence. And as Dr. Wapnick would always say, remember, nobody disappears. Nobody goes poof. Right? Nobody becomes a nebbish, as he would say. Right? It's a process. And remember that this is a dream, and a happy dream substitutes first. There is a happy dream first. In other words, as I practice forgiveness, right, as I'm praying for others, as this section would say, my understanding of the world and existence is becoming more clarified. And I'm understanding. Everything starts to reflect the oneness, reflect the innocence. And it's a very happy existence. That is what happens first. Nobody's going to disappear. Nobody's going to get destroyed. There's going to be that moment, and who knows how long the moment lasts, when everything is just so clear. Everything is so clear. There's no need to defend yourself. There's no fear. There's nothing, no anxiety, no scarcity. That's what we're working toward. Right? And, even in one of Ram Dass's lectures, he says, in all spiritual paths, truly spiritual paths, there comes that time when you come face to face with the truth of who you are. He says, that's very scary. Because there's that fear of being obliterated. Just remember that it's not going to happen. All right? Just not going to happen. All right? And he says, because we're afraid of that, all right, we make the other person our salvation, our escape from guilt, by making them the resting place for our guilt. We put it in them. He says, you have made of him your salvation and your escape from guilt. Because your investment in this escape is heavy and your fear of letting it go is strong. So as we get, there's the biggest fear is the fear of God. Because the ego, we're always taught that there's a vengeful God. He's going to get you. You ate the apple, you moron. I told you not to eat that. Now I'm going to stomp through the garden and I'm going to get you. You're going to live your life in pain. Right? And I got my man here with a burning spear, so make sure you never get back. All right? So the whole thing is very scary, approaching the gates of heaven there. First I got to talk to the guy with the burning spear. Hey man, it wasn't me. And so my investment in the escape is heavy. Right? And your fear of letting it go is strong. So my investment in the escape, which means my investment in projecting guilt, is very heavy. So it becomes a process. Just look at it without condemning yourself. Without reinforcing your guilt. The idea, I think, is always to just go, oh yeah, that's what I'm doing. Oh yeah, look, that's what I do. I don't want to do that. Because the observer, if you can observe yourself saying, oh look, I'm projecting guilt, that's the part of the mind that's not projecting the guilt. You're observing. So you can make a decision. Oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to do that. So he says in paragraph 5, stand still an instant now and think what you have done. Do not forget that it is you who did it and who can therefore let it go. Hold out your hand. This enemy has come to bless you. Take his blessing and feel how your heart is lifted and your fear is released. Do not hold on to it, nor on to him. He is a son of God along with you. He is no jailer, but a messenger of Christ. Be this to him, that you may see him thus. All right? He's not a jailer, but a messenger of your own innocence. He's a messenger of Christ. You are the innocent offspring of all that is. And he is the messenger who will reflect that to you. If I'm willing to see the truth about him, that's the process. That's the prayer for the other. I'm willing to see the truth. So that's what he says here. Stand still an instant and think what you have done. All right? So what I've done is I've believed I was guilty and I projected it. All right? It's what created this entire world of form, this entire universe. All right? With all those gazillions of planets. All right? That's the result of the projection of separation. There's gazillions of them, but they're all separate. All right? So stand still an instant. Just be quiet. And think what you have done. Take responsibility. Say, oh yeah, that's what I do. Yeah, that's what I'm doing. And don't forget that it is you who did this and who can therefore let it go. All right, so I'm not condemned to hell. I can let it go by asking, help me to see it correctly, by practicing that idea of forgiveness. Bringing back the projection and saying, no, wait, I want to see it correctly. And hold out your hand. In other words, be willing. Be willing to see the truth about the other. Hold out your hand. This enemy has come to bless you. All right? This enemy has come to let you know that you are innocent. That's a blessing. It's a mitzvah. This enemy has come to bless you. Take his blessing and feel how your heart is lifted, right? And your fear is released with the recognition of your innocence, with the recognition that the guilt is gone. You're just lighter, the incredible lightness of being, as they say. And there's no fear. Do not hold on to it. Don't hold on to this guilt and a projection. Be willing to let it go. Don't hold on to him as the guilty party, because he's the Son of God along with you. He's not a jailer. He's a messenger of Christ. He's a messenger of your innocence. No matter how horrible and scary and vile they may seem to be in form. Right? And as I always say, look, nobody's telling you to stand there and take it. Right? Nobody's telling you to be in form and let that form do something to you. Because it's the thoughts in the mind we're talking about. Right? I can remove myself from this form that's bothering me and then work on it in my mind. All right? I mean, you could work on people from your past who are long gone. still bringing up thoughts of rage and whatnot. You know? Be willing to see that it is your projection of guilt. Right? Be willing to let it go. Relinquish it. We're not telling you to sacrifice it. If you need to work on it any way you can. Until you get to the point where you can be willing to see the innocence. Be willing to see that they are a messenger of Christ. Be willing to see that past the form, they are a son of God, just like you. They're not a jailer, but a messenger of Christ. So be this to him, that you may see him thus. So you be a messenger of Christ. You be a messenger of innocence, so that you can see him that way. And you see yourself that way. So then he goes on in paragraph 6. It is not easy to realize that prayers for things, for status, for human love, for external gifts of any kind, are always made to set up jailers and to hide from guilt. These things are used for goals that substitute for God and therefore distort the purpose of prayer. The desire for them is the prayer. One need not ask explicitly. The goal of God is lost in the quest for lesser goals of any kind, and prayer becomes requests for enemies. The power of prayer can be quite clearly recognized even in this. No one who wants an enemy will fail to find one. But just as surely will he lose the only true goal that is given him. Think of the cost and understand it well. All other goals are at the cost of God. Okay? So he says, to go over that paragraph again, all right? It's not easy to realize. It's not easy to realize that prayers for things, right? Status, or someone to love. I just want someone to love me. Right? Is that too much to ask? All right? For external gifts of any kind are always made to set up jailers and to hide from guilt. These are what the text would refer to as special relationships. This is what's going to make me feel better. This is what's going to make me feel happy. This is what's going to make me feel loved. This is what's going to make me feel safe. Right? I pray for those things. All right? He says you're just setting yourself up. All right? You're setting yourself up. These things will become your jailer. Right? And these things will be a place where you can hide your own guilt. All right? These things are used for goals that substitute for God. This ice cream is going to make me very happy. It's going to help me. All right? This person is going to help me. All right? This business deal is going to help me. All right? These are all substitutes for your recognition of your relationship with God. All right? And don't beat yourself up for having ice cream. Just notice. That's the idea. Oh yeah, that's what I do. That's what I do. I get upset and I go get a tuna melt. Or I get upset and I go have a fling with someone. I get upset and I go drive fast, or I use a drug or a drink, or all these things are substitutes for the love that we think is missing. And we think it's missing because I think I separated from it. I separated from the love. So all these things are substitutes for God. Right? And therefore, they distort the purpose of prayer. So I'm praying. I'm praying for that relationship. I'm praying for that job. I'm praying for that bank account. Right? I'm praying, for happy hour to start or something, Looking forward to the weekend. All right. These are substitutes. All right. In the text, they're referred to as special relationships. All right. And the desire for them is the prayer. So that's what I want. My desire for that is the prayer. He says, you don't have to ask for it explicitly, and I'm not getting on my knees and saying, oh, please, Jesus, let me have that burger. He says, you don't have to ask for it explicitly. He says, the goal of God is lost in the quest for lesser goals of any kind. Right? And prayer becomes requests for enemies. I need some place to put my guilt. All right. So the thing is not to think that, oh, this is so overwhelming. I'll never be able to do this. I'll never be able to reach. I'll never be good. The idea is to just look at it and go, yeah, oh yeah, that's what I do, and help me to see this correctly. All right? Because there is no God who's waiting to get you to point out your faults. So, look, I told you you'll never be able to give up that candy. Right? You'll never be able to give up those relationships. You'll never be able to stop playing the stock market or whatever it is that helps us feel good. So don't think that. Try not to, or notice that you're thinking that way. And realize there is no God who's going to condemn you. There's only a God who's waiting for you to realize that you're still at home dreaming all this. All right, so the power of prayer can be quite clearly recognized even in this. All right, so one night you don't have to ask specifically for what it is you want. You just have the desire. The goal of God is lost in the quest for lesser goals of any kind. And prayer becomes requests for enemies. All right? So prayer becomes a request for enemies because you're standing in my way. I can't have it because of you. The power of prayer can be quite easily recognized even in this. No one who wants an enemy will fail to find one. But just as surely will he lose the only true goal that is given him. All right, so if the only true goal that is given me is to realize my own innocence, to have peace of mind. That's the only true goal that is given me, is to remember my innocence. So think of the cost and understand it well. Right? All goals are at the loss of God. All right? He's not saying this to condemn you or just like, hey, come on. Look, anything that you think is really important. All right? He's not saying don't go for it. Don't go for the job. Don't become successful. All right? Just take it with a grain of salt, as they used to say. All right? Just relax. Don't take it so seriously. All right? Because everything we're striving for within the ego, right? All these goals are at the cost of God. Because I'm going to be very nervous if I don't have a good job. Because I don't realize my relationship with the oneness. And nobody's saying, hey, just go sit on a mountaintop somewhere, or go, sit in a batch of trees off I-95 or something and, just ohm yourself away. Nobody's saying to do that. It's just notice, right? Notice how you're striving. Right? Notice the energy and the effort you put into, achieving things that you think you need. And just notice. And say, oh yeah, look at me. I'm working really hard at this. Because the true goal of our existence is to recognize our own innocence. In other words, to recognize that we are still in the company of the oneness, right? To have that memory come up, right? And that's the power of prayer. That's praying for ourselves and praying for others. I want to recognize that in everyone. Right? And it's a process and a practice. All right? So the old New York joke about the tourist that says, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? And the old New Yorker goes, practice, practice, practice. And that's how we get to the realization of our own innocence, by practicing. And that practicing is the process of forgiveness, which in this section we refer to as prayer. All righty then. I look forward to our next session. Bye now.